Welcome back, and thank you for tuning in to HK Cheating Stories. We appreciate each and every one of you joining us. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's get the story started.
My name is Ethan, and for most of my life, I thought the worst thing my brother ever did was make my childhood hell. I was wrong, because years later he did something far worse. He betrayed me in a way I never saw coming, by sleeping with my wife and fathering my son. I always knew my brother, Jake, was the favorite. I just never understood why. From the moment he was born, my mother adored him. He was her golden child. She cooked for him, did his laundry, made excuses for him whenever he got in trouble. Meanwhile, I was expected to be independent, to fend for myself, to understand that Jake needed more attention. I wanted to believe it was just how families worked. Maybe I was just more mature, more self-sufficient. But as we grew older, it became painfully clear that Jake wasn't just the favorite. He was untouchable. No matter what he did, he was never wrong. And I was just an afterthought. It started with small things. He'd steal my books and hide them, just to see me panic before an exam. He'd call me names, mocking my glasses, my height, the way I spoke. But the pranks became crueler. One night, I sat down for dinner, my stomach growling from a long day of school. I lifted my spoon, about to take a bite of my cereal, when something crunched hard between my teeth. A sharp, grinding sound filled my head. Something wasn't right. I spit it out, my heart pounding. It was a rock. Small, jagged pieces of stone had been mixed into my cereal. My jaw ached from nearly cracking my teeth. I turned to Jake, who sat across from me, grinning like this was some kind of joke. "Mom, Jake put rocks in my food," I shouted, shaking with anger. My mother barely looked up from the sink. "Oh, Ethan, don't be so dramatic," she sighed. "This is how brothers bond." Bond? I clenched my fists, swallowing back my frustration. I wanted to scream, to throw my bowl at Jake's stupid, smug face. But I already knew how this would end. Jake would get a pat on the back. I'd be told to stop overreacting. And it only got worse. Jake didn't just torment me in private. He made sure everyone else joined in too. At school, a few guys had already picked me as their favorite target. I was the quiet, nerdy kid who always had his head in a book. They called me names, shoved me in the hallways, laughed when I tried to fight back. I thought my own brother would step in. Maybe, just maybe, he'd defend me. Instead, he joined them. "Hey, loser." One of the bullies sneered as I walked past. "Why don't you crawl back into your hole?" Jake was right beside him. He smirked. "Yeah, Ethan. No one wants you here anyway." I stopped dead in my tracks. The words stung worse than any shove, any punch. I could take it from strangers, from classmates. But from my own blood? That night, I sat in my room, staring at my reflection in the mirror. Ugly, weak, pathetic. The words rang in my head, over and over. Then came the worst blow of all. It was a stupid fight. Something small, something I don't even remember. But Jake looked me in the eye, his face twisted in disgust, and said the words I'll never forget. "You should just kill yourself." My stomach dropped. The room felt cold. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. He walked away like he hadn't just shattered something inside me. Like those words didn't matter. But they did. More than he could ever know. That night, I sat in the dark, my chest tight with something I didn't fully understand yet. Was this what it felt like to be truly alone? To have your own brother wish you weren't alive? I was just a kid, but I knew one thing for sure. Jake wasn't my brother. He was my enemy. And one day, I'd make sure he regretted every second he spent making my life hell. I spent years letting Jake push me around, years pretending his words didn't hurt, that his pranks didn't get to me. But the truth? I was drowning in anger, in frustration, in helplessness. Then one night, everything changed. It started with something small, just another one of Jake's games. I had been saving my allowance for months, every penny tucked away in a small box in my desk. I had plans for that money, plans that mattered to me. A new laptop, maybe, or finally getting the bike I had wanted for years. But one afternoon, I opened my drawer, and my heart stopped. The box was gone. Panic surged through me as I tore through my room, searching everywhere. But deep down, I already knew what had happened. Jake. I stormed out of the house, scanning the driveway. And there he was, casually climbing onto his bike, laughing with his friends like nothing had happened. My box dangled from his fingers. Rage burned through my veins. "Jake!" I shouted, marching toward him. "Give it back." He barely glanced at me, his smirk widening. "Relax, big bro. I needed it for a date." I saw red. "You stole from me," I yelled, my voice shaking. Jake laughed, looking to his friends for support. "What are you gonna do? Run to daddy?" His voice dripped with mockery. "Face it, Ethan, you're just a weak little nerd. You've always been." Punched him. I don't even remember thinking about it. 1 second, I was standing there, fists clenched, and the next, my knuckles slammed into his face with a sickening crack. Jake stumbled backward, his eyes wide with shock as he hit the ground. Blood trickled from his lip. For the first time in my life, he looked afraid. I bent down, grabbed my money from his pocket, and shoved him back down. "You ever steal from me again?" I whispered, my voice low and steady. "And I'll do worse." Jake blinked up at me, stunned. He had never seen me like this before. And honestly, neither had I. Of course, my mother immediately rushed outside when she heard Jake wailing. "Ethan, what did you do?" she screeched, kneeling beside him like he was some fragile little lamb. Jake wiped his bloody lip, shooting me a smug look, as if he knew she'd take his side. "He attacked me, Mom," he sniffled, playing the victim perfectly. "For no reason." I scoffed. "No reason? He stole my money." "He's your brother, Ethan," she interrupted, standing up and glaring at me. "You should be a better role model." My jaw clenched. Of course she was defending him. Again. Then my father stepped out. "What's going on?" His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. He wasn't stupid. He had seen the pattern for years. I pointed at Jake, still on the ground. "He stole my money, Dad." Jake scrambled to his feet. "I needed it. Ethan never helps me." Dad's expression darkened. "Help you?" He took a slow step forward. "Jake, you stole from your own brother. Do you know what happens in the real world when you steal?" Jake paled. "You're lucky he only punched you," Dad continued coldly. "Anyone else would have called the police." Silence. Jake's mouth opened and closed, his confidence crumbling. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the golden child. For the first time, Dad wasn't on his side. That night, Jake locked himself in his room. He didn't speak to me for days. Something had shifted between us. I wasn't his punching bag anymore, and he knew it. But deep down, I also knew something else. This wasn't over. Not even close. After that night, something shifted in our house. Jake still avoided me, but his hatred simmered beneath the surface. It was in the way he muttered under his breath when I walked by, in the way he slammed doors just a little too hard, in the way he looked at me like he was waiting for me to slip up. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I was counting the days until I could leave. High school dragged on, but I kept my head down, pouring everything into my studies. I needed a way out, and I refused to stay under the same roof as Jake a second longer than necessary. Then, finally, my escape came. I had worked tirelessly, applied for every scholarship I could find, and when the acceptance letter arrived, I held my breath as I tore it open. I got in, the full ride. I stared at the words, my heart pounding. It was happening. I was getting out. I practically ran downstairs, bursting into the kitchen where my dad was reading the paper. "Dad, I got the scholarship," I blurted out, barely able to contain my excitement. He looked up, processing my words. And then, for the first time in a long while, he smiled. "That's my boy," he said, standing up to pat me on the back. "I knew you'd do it." I felt that, the pride in his voice, the validation I had spent my whole life craving. My mom was more subdued. "That's nice, Ethan," she said, forcing a smile. But I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't happy. Not really, because it meant I was leaving. And Jake? He barely reacted. just leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, staring at me like I had somehow wronged him by succeeding. "Good for you," he muttered. But his jaw was tight, his hands clenched into fists. He was furious. I didn't care. The night before I left, Dad threw me a small party. A few family members came over, congratulating me on the scholarship. Even my mom seemed to pretend to be happy. But Jake? He stayed in the corner, barely speaking to anyone. At one point, he pulled me aside, his voice low and bitter. "You think this changes anything?" he sneered. "You think just because you're leaving, you're better than me?" I smirked. "I don't think it, Jake. I know it." His nostrils flared, but for once, he had nothing to say, because he knew it too. The next morning, I packed my bags. My dad helped load them into the car, and my mom stood by the door, wringing her hands. "You don't have to leave so soon," she said softly. But we both knew that wasn't true. Jake leaned against the wall, watching silently as I grabbed my last bag. I turned to him. "Goodbye, Jake." He didn't respond, didn't even look at me. I stepped outside, taking a deep breath. The air smelled different, cleaner, lighter, like freedom. As we pulled out of the driveway, I didn't look back. I was finally free, or at least I thought I was. I had no idea my past was about to follow me, and that the worst betrayal was still waiting. College was my fresh start. No more Jake. No more toxic home. For the first time in my life, I could breathe. I focused on my studies, made new friends, and finally felt like I was building a life that was mine. No shadows of my past hanging over me. No brother to remind me that I was never enough. And then I met Lily. It was at a party, one of those loud, chaotic frat gatherings I usually avoided. But my roommate dragged me there, promising it would be worth it. And he was right. Lily stood across the room, laughing at something her friend said, her eyes bright, her presence effortless. I had never been the type to believe in love at first sight, but something about her pulled me in. And when our eyes met, I knew. We clicked instantly. She was funny, smart, full of life in a way I had never been. She made me feel like I mattered, like I wasn't just the quiet, overlooked guy in the corner. For the first time, someone chose me. We spent hours talking, staying up late, sharing pieces of ourselves we had never shared with anyone else. She told me about her strict religious upbringing, about how she had always felt pressure to be perfect. I told her about Jake, how he had made my childhood hell, how leaving home was the best thing that had ever happened to me. She listened, she understood, and I fell for her, hard. By the time we graduated, we were inseparable. Then Lily got pregnant. We were young, scared, and completely unprepared, but I was determined to do the right thing. So I proposed. Our wedding was small, intimate. My parents attended, beaming with pride. Even my mom, who had never truly supported my independence, looked proud. But Jake barely acknowledged it. He showed up, but he was distant, cold. He spent most of the reception drinking in the corner, watching me like he resented me for being happy. I ignored it, because for once I had everything. A wife, a future, a family of my own. Or so I thought. Years passed. Lily and I built a life together, raising our son. I worked hard, did everything I could to be the husband and father I had never had growing up. I thought we were happy, but then cracks started to show. Lily became distant. She started working late, taking more business trips. And then one night, I found a message on her phone. It wasn't just a fling. It wasn't just one mistake. It was an affair. I confronted her, and she broke down, sobbing, swearing it had been a moment of weakness, that it meant nothing. I wanted to believe her, so I forgave her, because I refused to let my son grow up in a broken home. Time passed and things seemed better. We rebuilt. We tried. Then, years later, I found out about the second affair. And suddenly, everything I thought I had fixed came crumbling down. But again, I stayed. Because I loved her. Because I believed people could change. Because I was a fool. Looking back, I should have seen it. The late nights. The way she avoided my eyes when I asked where she had been. But I was blind. And then, 3 months ago, she sat me down. I remember the way her hands shook, the way she wouldn't meet my gaze. "Ethan," she whispered, "there's something I have to tell you." I felt my stomach drop, and when she finally spoke the words that shattered everything I thought I knew, I felt the world spin around me. "The baby might not be yours." My mind went blank. My body went cold. And then she said his name. Jake. Everything inside me froze. Jake, my brother, the person who had spent my entire life trying to destroy me, had just taken everything. And this time, I wasn't sure I'd ever recover. I sat there, staring at Lily, my mind refusing to process the words she had just spoken. The baby might not be yours. Couldn't breathe. The room felt like it was closing in around me, the walls pressing tighter, suffocating me. She wouldn't look at me. Her hands were shaking, twisting the fabric of her shirt, but I didn't care. I needed her to say it again. I needed to be wrong. "Say that again," I rasped, my throat dry. Lily swallowed hard. I don't know if our son is yours or—" She hesitated, then whispered the name that sent a cold, sharp knife straight into my chest. "Jake." For a second, all I could hear was my own heartbeat, pounding like war drums in my ears. Jake, Jake. It didn't make sense. Couldn't make sense. My brother. The same brother who had tormented me my entire life. The same brother who had stolen from me, broken me, tried to ruin me at every chance he got. And now he had taken this too? I felt something deep inside me snap. "You slept with Jake?" My voice came out strangled, barely above a whisper. Lily flinched but didn't deny it. "It was a mistake, Ethan," she pleaded, finally meeting my eyes. "It was years ago. I didn't mean for it to happen." I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug into my palms. "Years." The word felt like acid on my tongue. She nodded, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "It happened when we were engaged. I was staying with your family over the holidays, and we just—" She stopped when she saw the look on my face. I didn't need to hear the details. I could see them already. The way Jake had always watched her. The way she had laughed at his jokes, spent time with him, invited him to outings, tried to bring us closer. It was all a lie. I had unknowingly married a woman who had been sleeping with my brother. And the worst part? My son, the child I had raised, loved, protected, might not even be mine. My hands trembled as I raked them through my hair. "And you never told me? You let me believe." "I didn't know," she insisted. "I thought he was yours. And when I found out I was pregnant, I chose you, Ethan. You were the responsible one. The one who would take care of us." I let out a bitter, hollow laugh. "So that's what I was to you? The safe choice." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "No, it wasn't like that. I love you. I always have." I shot up from my seat, my chair screeching against the floor. Don't you dare say that to me right now." She flinched but didn't argue. Because she knew. She knew this wasn't something I could ever forgive. I don't remember leaving the house. One moment, I was standing in front of Lily, my heart shattered beyond repair. The next, I was outside, walking aimlessly, the cold night air biting at my skin. I ended up at a motel. I don't even remember checking in. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone. My mind was screaming at me to call Jake, to demand answers, to hurt him the way he had hurt me. But I didn't, because I already knew what he would say. He would laugh, mock me, tell me it wasn't his fault if my wife couldn't resist him. I didn't want to hear it. Not yet. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I woke up in the motel room with a dull ache in my chest. The kind that settles deep in your bones and refuses to leave. The events of last night came rushing back like a nightmare on repeat. Lily, the betrayal, Jake, my own brother. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone. I wanted to call him, to scream, to demand an explanation. But what was there to explain? He had spent his entire life trying to ruin mine. And now he had succeeded. No, not yet. I wasn't going to let him win. By midday, I was sitting in my parents' living room, my hands clasped tightly as I stared at them. My mother looked concerned. My father had his arms crossed, sensing that whatever I was about to say wouldn't be good. "What's wrong, Ethan?" Dad finally asked. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Lily cheated on me," I said, my voice emotionless. Mom gasped, covering her mouth. Dad's brows furrowed, but neither of them said anything. They were waiting for the rest. I let the silence stretch for a second longer before I said the words that shattered whatever illusion of peace we had left. "It was with Jake." Mom's face went pale. Dad stiffened in his chair. "No," Mom whispered, shaking her head. "Not Jake. He wouldn't." I laughed bitterly. "Wouldn't he?" Dad was still silent, his jaw clenched. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were unreadable. "I want to hear it from him," he finally said. I nodded. "Then let's call him." I put my phone on speaker, my heart hammering in my chest as it rang. Once, twice. Then Jake's voice came through, casual as ever. "Ethan? Didn't think I'd be hearing from you." I forced my voice to stay steady. "You know why I'm calling, Jake?" A pause. Then a low chuckle. "She finally told you, huh?" My stomach twisted, but I kept my face blank. My parents sat frozen beside me, their eyes locked on the phone. "So it's true," I said, my voice eerily calm. Jake let out a slow breath. "Look, man, it just happened. All right? She was into me and I wasn't gonna say no. Can you really blame me?" Mom made a strangled noise, pressing her hands to her chest. Dad's expression darkened, his fingers gripping the edge of his chair. "You slept with my wife," I said, each word laced with venom. "And you knew what you were doing." "Come on, Ethan," Jake sighed. "We both knew she was never really yours." Something inside me snapped. "You arrogant, selfish piece of—" "Whoa, calm down," he interrupted, laughing. "You sound mad. Bro, look, it's not my fault women find me more attractive. She wanted me, not you." Silence. Then Dad spoke, his voice low and steady. "Jake." For the first time, I heard a flicker of hesitation in Jake's tone. "Dad, you are no longer my son." Jake inhaled sharply. "What?" "You have betrayed this family in a way I cannot forgive," Dad continued. "You will no longer receive a single cent from me. No more college funds. No more support. You're on your own." "Dad, wait." Dad hung up. The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother sat motionless, tears welling in her eyes. Dad stared at the phone, his expression unreadable. Finally, he turned to me. "I'll help you get a lawyer," he said. "Divorce her. Make sure she gets nothing." I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. For the first time in my life, my father chose me over Jake. But it didn't feel like a victory, because no matter what happened next, my world had already been destroyed. The days after my confrontation with Jake felt like moving through a fog, one thick with betrayal, heartbreak, and rage. I had always imagined that if my life ever fell apart, it would be because of something I did, a mistake I made. But no, it was Jake, again. And this time, he had taken more than just my dignity. He had taken my family. The divorce process started quickly. My father wasted no time finding me a lawyer, a damn good one. Lily tried to fight back. Of course, she did. She cried. She begged. She tried to play the victim, spinning excuses like a web around me. "I was lonely, Ethan," she sobbed during one of our meetings. "You were always working, always so distant. I made a mistake, but it didn't mean I didn't love you." I stared at her across the table, expressionless. "You don't love someone and sleep with their brother, Lily." She bit her lip, looking down at her lap. "It just happened." I clenched my fists under the table. "How long?" She hesitated. "How long, Lily?" She flinched at the venom in my voice. Then, in a whisper, "Years. Years." I felt something in me crack. I had spent years loving her, protecting her, making sacrifices for her. And she had spent years lying to my face. And now she wanted me to understand? I stood abruptly, my chair screeching against the floor. "I'm done here," I muttered, turning toward my lawyer. "Make sure she gets nothing." I didn't look back. The paternity test results arrived 2 weeks later. Even though I knew what they would say, I still felt sick to my stomach when I opened the envelope. Probability of paternity, 0%. I read it over and over, willing the words to change. Henry, the boy I had raised, kissed goodnight, taught how to ride a bike. He wasn't mine. My hands shook as I placed the paper down. I had spent years loving a child who wasn't even mine. And worse, Jake's blood ran through his veins. Lily begged me not to cut contact with Henry. He still needs you, Ethan, she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. He thinks you're his father. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. Then maybe you should have thought of that before you slept with my brother. She let out a choked sob. Please. He's innocent in all of this. I knew that, but every time I looked at Henry, all I saw was Jake. The same smirk, the same eyes. I couldn't do it. I'm sorry, I whispered, my voice barely audible. I can't. And I walked away. Jake, predictably, went into full panic mode when he realized our father was serious about cutting him off. He tried calling, texting. I ignored every message. Then, one night, he showed up at my apartment. I opened the door to find him standing there, disheveled, his usual arrogance gone. Ethan, man, just hear me out, he started, running a hand through his hair. I folded my arms. You have 30 seconds. He swallowed hard. Dad's really cutting me off. I can't afford school. Karen's asking for child support. I don't know what to do. I stared at him. This was Jake. The same Jake who had tormented me for years, stolen from me, laughed at my pain. And now he was begging me? I let out a humorless chuckle. Sounds like a you problem. His face twisted with desperation. Come on, man. You can talk to Dad.
No.
My voice was sharp, final. You made your choices, Jake. Now live with them. His expression crumbled. For the first time in his life, he had no way out. And for the first time, I didn't care. I shut the door in his face, and I never looked back. The door clicked shut, sealing Jake out of my life. For the first time, I wasn't the one begging. I wasn't the one suffering. He was, and the best part? I felt nothing. Days passed, then weeks, then months. I focused on rebuilding. First, it was strange, being alone.
No Lily. No Henry.
No family obligations. Just me in my apartment, waking up every day with no one to take care of but myself. But soon, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I was free. I didn't have to walk on eggshells around my brother. I didn't have to tolerate Lily's excuses, her lies, her crocodile tears. I wasn't trapped anymore, and I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. A few months after the divorce was finalized, my father called. I'm changing my will, he said without preamble. I leaned back in my chair, raising an eyebrow. Oh, Dad sighed. I don't want Jake contesting anything when I'm gone. I've made it official. Everything goes to you. I froze. Everything? My father wasn't a billionaire, but he had worked his entire life to build his wealth. The house, the retirement fund, the life insurance, it all added up to nearly $2 million. And he was leaving all of it to me. What about Mom? I asked carefully. She'll be taken care of, Dad assured me. But Jake, a pause. He gets nothing. I let out a low whistle. Dad wasn't bluffing. When he cut someone out, he meant it. And I knew, deep down, that Jake deserved every bit of this. Somehow, Jake found out. It wasn't hard to guess how. Mom. She had always defended him, always made excuses for him, even after everything. A part of me had hoped she had changed, that seeing the truth about Jake would finally open her eyes. But no, she still thought he could be saved. And because of her, he found out about the will. Jake called me late one night, his voice frantic. Ethan, please, you gotta talk to Dad. He can't do this to me. I smirked. He can. And he did. Jake let out a shaky breath. You don't get it, man.
I'm struggling.
Karen's demanding child support. I can't afford school and now. I cut him off. Sounds like you're finally facing consequences, Jake. Sucks, doesn't it? He was quiet for a moment. Then his voice broke. "Please, Ethan." I closed my eyes. For a split second, I almost felt sorry for him. Then, I remembered everything. The bullying, the torment, the betrayal. I remembered the way he laughed when I found out about Lily. The way he told me she was never mine to begin with. And just like that, any pity I had vanished. "You're not my brother anymore, Jake," I said, my voice cold. "You made sure of that." He let out a choked sob. I hung up, and I never answered his calls again. The last I heard, Jake had dropped out of college. He and Lily were living together in a tiny apartment, barely scraping by. Apparently, he was working as a part-time mechanic. Fitting job, really. Fixing broken things. Too bad he could never fix himself. As for me, I was doing better than ever. I got a promotion at work, my salary nearly doubled, and for the first time I felt like I was in control of my own life. I wasn't dating yet, wasn't ready for that, but I was healing. Slowly, steadily, and best of all, I never had to look over my shoulder for Jake ever again, because the past was finally behind me, and my future, it was mine.